The sound of a gunshot echoed through the small Montana town as Beatrice Ross clutched her 3-month-old daughter to her chest, tears streaming down her face while her husband Vernon stood before her, his hand outstretched toward the tall stranger who had just placed a leather pouch of coins in his palm. "$20 is fair for the child," Vernon slurred, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey as he counted the coins. "My wife can make another, and this one cries too much anyway." The year was 1876, and Beatrice had never felt more trapped. At 22, she had married Vernon 2 years prior, believing his promises of a good life in the Montana Territory. Instead, she found herself with a drunk for a husband who gambled away what little they had and now, in a moment of desperation or perhaps pure malice, was attempting to sell their only child. "You cannot do this," Beatrice pleaded, backing away as Vernon reached for the baby. "Mary is our daughter." The stranger, a tall man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat, stepped between them. "I changed my mind," he said firmly, snatching back the pouch of coins. "No decent man sells his own blood," Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You made a deal, Xavier." "We shook on it." Xavier Quaid, a cattle rancher known throughout the territory for his fair dealings and hard work, stood his ground. "I only offered to buy the child to see what kind of man would accept. Now I know." His hand rested casually on the handle of his revolver. "And I suggest you leave town before the sheriff hears about this." Vernon spat at Xavier's boots. "That woman and the brat are my property by law. You have no right. The law doesn't look kindly on men who sell their children," Xavier cut in. "Now get out of my sight before I decide $20 is fair price for putting a bullet in you instead." Beatrice watched as her husband's expression shifted from anger to fear. Vernon had always been a coward at heart. Without another word, he turned and staggered toward the saloon, likely to drink away his humiliation. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, rocking her crying daughter. "But he'll come back when he's drunk enough to be brave again." Xavier nodded grimly. "Then you need to be gone before that happens." He looked at the young woman, noting the bruise on her cheek that her bonnet failed to hide. "My ranch is 15 miles north. You can stay there until you figure out what to do next." Beatrice hesitated. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. "Why would you help us?" "Because that child deserves better," Xavier said simply. "And so do you." Within the hour, Beatrice found herself seated beside Xavier on his wagon, her few belongings packed hastily, her daughter sleeping against her chest. As the town grew smaller behind them, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, replaced by the terrifying uncertainty of what lay ahead. The journey to Xavier's ranch was mostly silent, broken only by little Mary's occasional whimpers and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves against the dirt road. The Montana landscape spread out around them, vast and beautiful, golden prairie grass swaying in the late afternoon breeze. "I have a sister in Denver," Beatrice finally said. "If I could save enough for train fare, perhaps she would take us in." Xavier kept his eyes on the road. "No need to decide today. Winter's coming. The passes will be snowed in soon enough. You're welcome to stay until spring if need be." As they crested a hill, Xavier's ranch came into view, a sprawling property with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and smoke curled from the chimney. "It's beautiful," Beatrice remarked, genuinely surprised by the prosperity evident in every corner of the property. "Been building it for 8 years now," Xavier said with a hint of pride. "Started with nothing but 50 acres and 3 cows." He glanced at her. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, will help get you settled. She's been with me since my wife passed." Beatrice looked at him with new understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. It was 5 years ago. Fever took her and our unborn child." His voice was steady, but Beatrice noticed how his knuckles whitened as he gripped the reins tighter. "That's why I couldn't stand by when I saw what your husband was doing, Mrs. Abernathy turned out to be a plump, motherly woman in her 50s, who took one look at Beatrice and Mary, before declaring they both needed feeding and rest. She showed them to a comfortable bedroom with a small adjoining space perfect for a cradle, which one of the ranch hands quickly brought up from the attic where it had been stored since Xavier's wife died. That night, after putting Mary down to sleep, Beatrice stood by the window of her room, watching as Xavier walked from the barn to the house, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She wondered what kind of man would open his home to strangers this way, especially knowing her husband might come looking for them. The days at the ranch fell into a rhythm. Beatrice, determined not to be a burden, insisted on helping with household chores. She proved to be an excellent cook, much to Mrs. Abernathy's delight, and soon the two women were working side by side, preparing meals for Xavier and his 5 ranch hands. Xavier himself was often away from the house, managing his cattle and land, but at dinner, he would inquire about Beatrice and Mary's comfort, ensuring they had everything they needed. He was never intrusive, always respectful, maintaining a careful distance that both reassured and, strangely, disappointed Beatrice. One evening, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Beatrice found Xavier sitting on the porch after everyone else had retired for the night. He was carving a small wooden horse, his hands moving with surprising delicacy for such a big man. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, setting aside his work. "How are you settling in?" "Well," she replied, sitting in the rocking chair beside him. "Mary sleeps better here. I think she feels safer." After a pause, she added, "As do I." Xavier studied her for a moment. "Your husband Vernon," she supplied. "Vernon," he continued. "Has he always been cruel?" Beatrice sighed, looking out at the star-filled sky. "No, when we met, he was charming. Ambitious. He talked about building a ranch like this one." She smiled sadly. "But the drinking started after our first winter here. Then the gambling. By the time I realized who he truly was, I was already with child." "And you had nowhere to go," Xavier concluded. She nodded. "My parents disowned me when I married him. They warned me he was no good, but I was young and in love, or so I thought." She looked down at her hands. "I should thank you properly for what you did that day. You saved my daughter." "That's my child now," Xavier said abruptly, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean what I told the townspeople when they asked. I said you were my late wife's cousin, come to stay after your husband passed, and that I'd claimed the child as my own to protect her inheritance." Beatrice was surprised. "You've thought this through?" "Had to," he said simply. "Word spreads fast out here. Better to have a story ready than let people wonder." He picked up the wooden horse again. "This is for Mary when she's older." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. "You're a good man, Xavier Quaid." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Get some rest, Mrs. Ross. Tomorrow's baking day, according to Mrs. Abernathy, and she's been talking about your apple pies all week." As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch became Beatrice's sanctuary. Mary thrived, growing stronger each day, her smiles and coos bringing joy to everyone around her. Even the gruffest ranch hands would stop to make faces at the baby when they thought no one was looking. Xavier remained a somewhat distant figure, always kind but reserved. Beatrice often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, she would find small gifts, wildflowers on the kitchen table, a ribbon for Mary's hair, a book of poetry she had mentioned wanting to read. On a snowy December evening, with the wind howling outside, Beatrice sat by the fire in the main room, mending one of Xavier's shirts. Mary was asleep upstairs, and Mrs. Abernathy had retired early with a headache. Xavier entered, stomping snow from his boots. "Storm's getting worse," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Might be snowed in for a few days." "I made stew," Beatrice replied. "It's keeping warm on the stove." He nodded gratefully and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a bowl and settling into the chair across from her. They sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind. "You never talk about your family," Beatrice ventured after a while. Xavier set down his spoon. "Not much to tell. Father was a trapper. Mother died when I was young. No siblings." Learned ranching from my uncle in Texas before heading north on my own. And your wife, what was she like? A shadow crossed his face. Catherine was gentle, loved books, loved this land. He stared into the fire. We were married 3 years when she got sick. It happened fast. I'm sorry for bringing up painful memories. Don't be, he said. It's good to remember her sometimes. He looked at Beatrice directly. She would have liked you. The sincerity in his voice made Beatrice's heart skip. I would have liked her too, I think. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the warm house, something subtle shifted between them. It wasn't spoken, this new awareness, but it was there in the lingering glances, the accidental brushes of hands, the shared smiles over Mary's antics. As Christmas approached, the ranch was transformed by Mrs. Abernathy's determined festivity. Evergreen boughs adorned mantels, candles glowed in windows, and the smell of gingerbread and cinnamon filled the air. Beatrice threw herself into the preparations, wanting to make the holiday special for everyone who had been so kind to her and Mary. On Christmas Eve, after a feast that left everyone stuffed and contented, Xavier surprised Beatrice by asking her to accompany him outside. I have something to show you, he said, helping her into her coat and wrapping a warm scarf around her neck. They walked through the snow to the barn, where Xavier led her to a stall at the far end. Inside was a beautiful bay mare, her coat gleaming in the lantern light. This is Penny, Xavier said. She's yours if you want her, Beatrice gasped. Mine, but I don't know how to ride. I'll teach you, he promised. Come spring, you should be able to go wherever you please. The implication was clear. He was giving her freedom, the ability to leave if she chose to. This is too generous, she protested. Xavier shook his head. You've brought life back to this house, Beatrice. You and Mary both. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sounded right on his lips. This is the least I can do. Impulsively, Beatrice stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Thank you. Their eyes met, and for a moment Beatrice thought he might kiss her properly. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. We should get back inside before you catch cold. That night, lying in bed, Beatrice touched her lips, wondering what it would be like to kiss Xavier Quaid, to be held in his strong arms. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She was still legally married, still vulnerable, and she had Mary to think of. Could she risk opening her heart again so soon? January brought bitterly cold temperatures and news that troubled the peaceful existence they had established. One of the ranch hands returned from town with word that Vernon Ross had been asking questions about a woman and baby matching Beatrice and Mary's description. He's been to 3 counties already, the ranch hand reported, offering a reward for information. Xavier's face hardened. He won't find them here. No one in town would betray us. But Beatrice wasn't so sure. Money loosens tongues, she said quietly after the others had left the room, and Vernon can be persuasive when he wants to be. Do you want to leave? Xavier asked, his voice carefully neutral. I could arrange passage to Denver if that's what you wish. The thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Xavier, filled Beatrice with an unexpected sadness. No, she said firmly. I'm tired of running from him. This is our home now, Mary's and mine. Something like hope flickered in Xavier's eyes. Then we'll deal with Vernon Ross if he shows up, together. February brought a thaw, and with it, Xavier began teaching Beatrice to ride as promised. She was a quick learner, soon gaining confidence on Penny's back, her laughter ringing out as they cantered across the meadows. It was during one of these riding lessons, with Mary securely bundled and watching from Mrs. Abernathy's arms on the porch, that Xavier finally spoke of his growing feelings. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he said as they dismounted by a small stream, letting the horses drink. After Catherine died, I figured that part of me was done. Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. And now, he turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. Now I find myself waking up each morning looking forward to seeing your face, to hearing Mary's laugh, to being part of a family again. He took her hands in his. I know your situation is complicated, I know you might not feel the same, but I needed you to know that, whatever happens, you and Mary have a place here for as long as you want it. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. I do feel the same, she whispered. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I care for you deeply, Xavier, more than I thought possible. He raised a hand to her cheek, brushing away a tear with his thumb. May I kiss you, Beatrice? She nodded, and his lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion. It was nothing like Vernon's rough, demanding kisses. Xavier held her as if she were precious, his touch respectful even in its desire. When they parted, both breathless, Beatrice knew that whatever happened next, her heart had made its choice. The confrontation they had been dreading came in early March, on a clear, cold morning. Beatrice was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Looking out the window, she saw Vernon dismounting, his face twisted with anger. Xavier emerged from the barn, intercepting Vernon before he could reach the house. From the kitchen window, Beatrice could see them arguing, Vernon gesticulating wildly while Xavier stood calm and immovable. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her side, Mary in her arms. Take the baby upstairs, the older woman said firmly. I'll fetch Mr. Jensen's shotgun from the hall. Beatrice hesitated, torn between protecting her daughter and standing her ground. Go, Mrs. Abernathy insisted. Mr. Quaid can handle himself, but the child needs you. Upstairs, Beatrice paced by the window, watching the confrontation below. She could see that Vernon had drawn a pistol, waving it erratically while Xavier remained unarmed, his hands visible at his sides. The sound of the front door opening made Beatrice turn. Mrs. Abernathy stood there, shotgun in hand. The sheriff's just ridden up, she said. Must have followed your husband from town. Relief flooded through Beatrice. Sheriff Miller was a fair man, respected throughout the county for his even-handed justice. By the time Beatrice made it downstairs with Mary, Vernon was being led away by the sheriff, his hands bound behind his back. Attempted murder's a hanging offense, Sheriff Miller was saying. Drawing on an unarmed man in his own property? What were you thinking, Ross? Vernon's face was purple with rage. That's my wife, my child, he stole them from me. The sheriff looked to Beatrice, who stood in the doorway. Madam, is what he's saying true? Xavier stepped forward. Beatrice came here of her own free will, Sheriff. After her husband tried to sell their baby to me for $20. Sheriff Miller's eyebrows shot up. Is that a fact? He asked Beatrice. It is, she confirmed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He was drunk as usual and decided Mary was worth less to him than a night of gambling. The sheriff shook his head in disgust. Well, that changes things considerably. He turned to Vernon. You'll be facing more charges than just attempted murder, looks like. As the sheriff led Vernon away, the latter shouted over his shoulder, This isn't over, Xavier. A man has rights to his wife and child. Xavier's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until the sheriff and Vernon were out of sight. Then he turned to Beatrice, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? She nodded, clutching Mary closer. What happens now? The law's on our side, Xavier assured her, but Vernon's right about one thing legally. He has claimed to you both as things stand. Then I need a divorce, Beatrice said firmly, and I need to ensure Mary stays with me. Xavier nodded. I know a good lawyer in Helena. We'll start the proceedings immediately. He hesitated. There's something else we should discuss, but not now. You've had enough to deal with today. That evening, after Mary was asleep, Xavier asked Beatrice to join him in his study. The room was warm, lined with bookshelves, a large desk positioned near the window with a view of the mountains. I've been thinking, he began, motioning for her to sit in one of the leather chairs by the fireplace. About the future, yours and Mary's and mine. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken. What about it? Xavier sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The divorce proceedings could take months, even with a good lawyer, and Vernon might contest it, drag things out even longer. I know, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. I understand if you think we should leave to avoid complications. No, he interrupted. That's not what I'm saying at all. He reached for her hands. I want you to stay, both of you, permanently. Hope bloomed in Beatrice's chest. As your housekeeper. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. As my wife, when you're free to marry again. Beatrice's breath caught. Xavier, I love you, he said simply. I love Mary as if she were my own daughter. I want us to be a family properly. Tears of joy filled Beatrice's eyes. I love you too. And nothing would make me happier than to be your wife. He kissed her then, a promise sealed with tenderness and passion, a beginning rather than an end. The divorce process was indeed lengthy and contentious. Vernon, facing jail time for his numerous offenses, fought the proceedings out of spite rather than any real desire to reclaim his wife and child. But with Xavier's support and the testimony of several townspeople who had witnessed Vernon's neglect and cruelty, Beatrice was eventually granted her freedom. Throughout the legal battles, life at the ranch continued. Mary took her first steps in the garden Xavier had planted for Beatrice, laughed her first real laugh while sitting on his shoulders, and began calling him Pa to everyone's delight. Xavier and Beatrice were married on a perfect June day in 1877, 15 months after their first meeting. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with wildflowers decorating every surface and Mary toddling down the makeshift aisle scattering flower petals. That's my child now, Xavier whispered during the reception, watching as Mary charmed the guests with her antics. And you're my wife. I still can't quite believe it, Beatrice squeezed his hand. Believe it, we're exactly where we're meant to be. 5 years later, the Quaid Ranch had expanded to twice its original size. Beatrice and Xavier had added 2 more children to their family, twin boys, Thomas and James, now 3 years old and as mischievous as their father was steady. Mary, now nearly 6, was the apple of Xavier's eye, following him around the ranch and showing a natural aptitude for horsemanship that made him burst with pride. She had no memory of Vernon Ross, who had died in a prison brawl shortly after Beatrice's divorce was finalized. On the anniversary of the day, Xavier had first brought Beatrice and Mary to the ranch. The family gathered on the porch after dinner. The children played in the yard while Beatrice leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? She asked. If you hadn't been in town that day, if you hadn't stepped in, Xavier pulled her closer. I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, he said. But I thank God every day that I was there, that you were brave enough to leave, and that we found each other. Beatrice looked at their children, Mary teaching the twins to make daisy chains, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. When Vernon tried to sell Mary, he had no idea he was actually giving us both the greatest gift, she mused. A new beginning, a real family. Xavier kissed the top of her head. The moment I said that's my child now, I meant it with everything in me. I just didn't realize then that I was claiming not just Mary, but you too. My heart recognized you both as mine before my head caught up. As darkness fell, Xavier lit the lamps on the porch, their warm glow creating a circle of light that held the family safe within its boundaries. Mary ran up, presenting her father with a slightly crushed daisy chain. For you, Pa, she said solemnly, because you saved me when I was a baby. Xavier knelt to her level, placing the flowers on his head like a crown. No, little one, you saved me, you and your mama both. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Beatrice and Xavier stood by their bedroom window looking out at the star-filled sky. I never dreamed I could be this happy, Beatrice confessed. When I was with Vernon, I thought that was all life had for me, just enduring day after day. Xavier turned her to face him. You deserve every happiness, Beatrice Quaid, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. We already do, she whispered against his lips. Everything I could ever want is right here. And as they held each other in the moonlight, Beatrice knew that the desperate young mother she had once been was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had found not just safety, but joy, purpose, and a love strong enough to heal the deepest wounds. In Xavier's arms, she was home,